Goat versus fish. In the beginning, there was Goat versus Fish, the GoatVsFish. And Goat versus Fish said that there should be goat and that there should be fish. There is no alpha or omega. There is no black or white. There is no good or evil. There is only goat and fish. And goat versus fish. Welcome to the Goat vs. Fish podcast, recorded at the Comedy Store, Los Angeles, a place of Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish speaks to you now. Goat vs. Fish speaks to you now. You, yes you. You are a part of Goat vs. Fish. Forever Goat vs. Fish. And Goat vs. Fish is a part of you. You have many questions, yes? Who is Goat vs. Fish? What is Goat vs. Fish? Why is Goat vs. Fish? But there is only one question. Are you goat or are you fish? Ponder it. Ponder it now. This is Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish goes about. Goat vs. Fish goes about, you know. Goat vs. Fish speaks to the ones on the Goat vs. Fish podcast, but Goat vs. Fish goes out to the land and the sea to find ones who have not even heard of the Goat vs. Fish podcast, to ask them if they are goat or fish, and to try to find more goat and more fish to be Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish did just attend the Pasadena Comic Con. Yes, the Pasadena Comic Con. And there are those that did see Goat vs. Fish at the Comic Con that now listen to the Goat vs. Fish podcast, that do listen even now, and Goat vs. Fish welcomes you. Goat vs. Fish welcomes you. Goat vs. Fish spoke to many goat and fish there, many followers of Goat vs. Fish. You ones at the Comic Cons, yes, you do look so strange, so lost in your causal play, as you call it. Yes, the causal play. Very few looked like goat or fish. Very few. Though, of course, all things are goat and fish, and all ones are goat or fish. And many did choose goat or fish when asked, are you goat or fish? Do you remember when you were first asked if you are goat or fish? It pleases Goat vs. Fish that so many at the Comic Con, yes, did choose goat or fish. Though there were a few who sat on the fence, choosing neither goat nor fish. Fence-sitters! You know who you are. You know who you are! In any verses, this is the verses for you. Come one goat, come one fish, come all goat and fish. Listen to the Goat vs. Fish podcast, hear the word of Goat vs. Fish, and ponder what all the goat and fish who speak to Goat vs. Fish have to say. Where to begin? Where to begin? Says the one who just heard of Goat vs. Fish. You can begin in the beginning with the first verses of the Goat vs. Fish podcast with one comedian, Tom Whalen, it does say. Is it goat or fish? You can find out now if it is goat or fish, can you? It is a fine verses to begin to understand Goat vs. Fish. Or if you are feeling very fence-sitterly indeed, you can begin with the 13th verses. The 13th verses of the Goat vs. Fish podcast with one Lou Hinkle, yes. But beware, goat and fish, beware, goat and fish. The 13th verses is not for the faint of Goat vs. Fish. For this one is Lou Hinkle is explicitly a fence-sitter. Explicitly a fence-sitter. And you may not wish small goat or fish to hear the words of this fence-sitter. For that small one that has not even heard the word of Goat vs. Fish, if that small one were to hear these fence-sitterly things, these fence-sitterly words, it may never choose goat or fish, it may never choose goat or fish. But it is Goat vs. Fish. It is all Goat vs. Fish. And remember, if you have something to say to Goat vs. Fish, you already miss speaking to Goat vs. Fish. You wish to say, I'm a goat, or I'm a fish, or I am a fence-sitter who chooses neither goat nor fish, and I am oh so pitiable, and the fence is very uncomfortable, yes. Whatever you wish to say, or a question for Goat vs. Fish, do send it to Goat vs. Fish. Do send it to Goat vs. Fish on the Instagram, on the Twitterver, at GoatVsFish, at GoatVsFish. Share your words with Goat vs. Fish, and welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. And now, Goat vs. Fish. Batman. Batman. Is it goat or fish? Is it goat or fish? Many causal players professed a strong liking for this Batman. And there were many visages of a Batman all around Goat vs. Fish at the Pasadena Comic Con and the Palm Springs Comic Con and the LA Comic Con as well. Many causal players, be they goat or fish, did attempt to appear as this Batman wearing fence-sitterly things, and some did even say, I am Batman. Some did even say it. They said, I am Batman. You who listen, you who call yourself a Batman, put aside this false verses. Put aside this false verses. Put aside the false verses of this causal play, the kind of which is only done by the tiniest goat or fish who do not even yet comprehend the seriousness of Goat vs. Fish. Have you no verses, Batman? Have you no verses? What would your goat and fish think? What would your goat and fish think, the one that raised you to be a true goat or fish? What would they say? What would they say? You are breaking their very goat and fish. You are breaking their very goat and fish. Batman is a false verses. Goat vs. Fish is not. Batman is a frivolous verses. Being a goat or fish is not. It is not. It is not. But if Batman were a goat or a fish, well, that would be another verses entirely. Is Batman a goat or a fish? Of course, every Batman must say for itself if it is a goat or a fish. But there is an evidence. There is an evidence. Is it goatly evidence? Is it fishly evidence? We shall see. We shall see. One called Producer Albamani does submit this evidence in the Goat vs. Fish discussion group on the Book of Faces. This Producer Albamani will not say if it is a goat or a fish, and admittedly that makes this evidence far less Goat vs. Fish. But let us examine this evidence. Let us examine this evidence before we dismiss it as the ramblings of a deranged fence-sitter. For that is the way of Goat vs. Fish. That is the way of Goat vs. Fish, to ponder any evidence of goat or fish. It is said in this evidence, yes. First, know that many say that a Batman is from a place called Gotham. Is Gotham land or sea, goat or fish? It is said that it is Gotham. Goat vs. Fish knows that a Batman is from a place that is called a Gotham, yes? So is Gotham a goat or a fish? Well, one called Albamani does say, Gotham, place. New York City, first used by Washington Irving in Salamagundi, 1807. Based on Merry Tales of the Mad Men of Gotham, 1460, a collection of legendary stories of English villagers alternatively wise and foolish. Some say Goat vs. Fish is alternatively wise and foolish. The evidence continues. There is a village of this name in Nottinghamshire, originally Gatham, in Old English, meaning enclosure where goats are kept. Enclosure where goats are kept. Gotham, where goats are kept. This is an evidence. This is very goatly evidence that Batman is a goat. If Batman is of Gotham and Gotham is where goats are kept, then it would seem that Batman is a goat. Send a message to Batman on this Twitterver and the Instagram and ask Batman if it is a goat or a fish. Or say for yourself, say to GoatVsFish if you think Batman is a goat or a fish. Are you a Batman? Do you claim to be a Batman? Tell GoatVsFish at GoatVsFish and tell all the ones. Say, I am Batman. And I'm a goat. Say, I am Batman and I am a fish. GoatVsFish has heard of this Batman, yes, and has looked for more evidence of this Batman, yes. It seems that the Batman is this one. It acts very differently from the other ones. First, it seems it is strong. Yes, it does seem like it is alone. Strong and alone, yes. But it is always trying to versus all these other ones that are also very strange and alone, yes. Always versing them. Yes, but this one that is Batman does not seem very content to do so, yes. GoatVsFish wonders if Gotham is a place where goats are kept. Is it the Batman that is keeping the goats? GoatVsFish even remembers a verses of the Batman, as you call it, yes, where none could enter the place of Gotham and none could leave the place of Gotham, yes, and there were many that were versing within, yes, and it did not seem like a pleasant verses. But there was Batman, yes. Perhaps Batman is a fish. Perhaps Batman is a fish that is trying to keep the goat from versing other fish. Or perhaps it is simply a fence sitter that has made this fence to keep the goat within Gotham. Perhaps it does not even care if they are goat or fish. Perhaps it simply wishes to contain the other ones. Wishes to contain all the other ones because it is so afraid of everything. It is difficult to say, but there is an evidence that Batman is a goat. And it was written. In a previous verses of the GoatVsFish podcast, the 11th verses of the GoatVsFish podcast, GoatVsFish did hear from a goat and a fish, that did speak to GoatVsFish from a faraway land and a faraway sea. Perhaps as you listened to the 11th verses of GoatVsFish, perhaps you heard the goat and fish that were speaking to GoatVsFish. Perhaps you did not. Perhaps you strained to hear them. GoatVsFish can often hear the goat and fish speaking to GoatVsFish when the one such as you cannot. Yes, that is the way of GoatVsFish, can always hear the goat and fish. But now it is the verses for GoatVsFish to share with you what that goat and fish did say. "There is no fish for me to verses," cried the goat. "There is no goat for me to verses," cried the fish. So pitiable, so pitiable. Perhaps you have felt this way, goat or fish. Perhaps you have felt this way, all alone in GoatVsFish. All alone in GoatVsFish. Do not despair, do not despair. You say there is no other goat or fish around you. You say you have not verses or even formed the unity of the goatfish with another goat or fish. You say that you are lonely as a goat or fish. Some may become so lonely that they say they do not wish to continue GoatVsFish. They say, "I do not wish to continue with GoatVsFish. If I am the only goat and the only fish, for no one understands GoatVsFish but me," you say. "I cannot continue the verses alone." You may even say you wish you had never been part of GoatVsFish. "I wish I had never been part of GoatVsFish." You may ponder it. You may even ponder it, these fence-sitterly things. It is pitiable. This is pitiable. But it does not mean you should give up the verses. It does not mean you should give up the verses. When there are none to verses around you, it is time not to give up the verses, but to strengthen the verses. To strengthen the verses. And GoatVsFish is here to help you strengthen the verses. Come. Listen. Ponder. Take in GoatVsFish. Close the eye of your goat or fish. That is a goat or a fish. For the eye of a goat is a goat, and the eye of a fish is a fish. Close the eye of your goat or fish. And let us have a pondering of GoatVsFish. Goat. Fish. Ponder yourself now, where the land does meet the sea. Ponder yourself at the beach, a place of many mighty verses. You are swimming in the sea, or frolicking on the land. Not sitting on the fence, no, not sitting on the fence. And all of a sudden you encounter a goat or a fish. You encounter a goat or fish ready to verses, ready to verses. There it is. See it. What do you say? What do you do? Do you verses? Do you form the unity of the goatfish? Goat, fish. Ponder these things, ponder these things. Ponder these things when you wish to give up goat versus fish. Be deep in your ponderings, be deep in your ponderings. For many, many verses, many, many verses you can ponder. And the ones may look at you strangely. The ones will look at you strangely, oh yes, for daring to ponder goat versus fish, for daring to ponder goat versus fish. They will tell you the pondering is not the way you should be. You should not be pondering all of the verses, they say. They will tell you to give up goat versus fish. You have told it to yourself, perhaps? But others will tell you. Even as you find great goat versus fish within goat versus fish, they will tell you to give up goat versus fish, to cast aside goat versus fish, to reject goat versus fish. When they tell you this, look at that one and say, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Ask them if they are a goat or a fish. That is how you respond. That is how you respond. If they are a goat and you are a goat, then the search for a fish multiplies, yes, across the land and sea, wherever the fish may be. If they are a fish and you are a fish, then the search for goat multiplies across the sea and the land, wherever the goat may be. The goat are of the land, the fish are of the sea. Yes, but sometimes the goat go to the sea to versus the fish. And sometimes the fish go to the land. It did rain fish in a place called Mexico. It did rain fish. If you find one of you that is a goat and the other is a fish, then it is goat versus fish. Then it is goat versus fish, and you have found the verses that you seek. You are no longer alone in goat versus fish if you find a goat or fish to verses. You have found goat versus fish. And if they are a fence sitter, help them off the fence. Help them off the fence if you can. For within every fence sitter is a verse is within, and that is a verses. That is a true verses as well. You do not have to be alone with goat versus fish. You do not have to be alone with goat versus fish. Find one who is lost. Find one who does not know the way. And ask, are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? For that is how you can be unlonely with goat versus fish. That is how you can be unlonely. And it was written, and it was written. And now, goat and fish, the time has come to celebrate goat versus fish. Goat vs. Fish has said that other ones such as you can send in a celebration to Goat vs. Fish, and Goat vs. Fish will share it on the Goat vs. Fish podcast, yes. And one that is called Nick Blake has sent a celebration to Goat vs. Fish. Nick Blake, is a goat. Nick Blake has said it is a goat, so this celebration of goat versus fish does come from a goat. And this one that is a goat that is called Nick Blake does say, in its own word, not in the word of goat versus fish, in its own word, here is a celebratory hymn from the VT artist community for goat versus fish. What is a hymn? Goat versus fish has never heard this word. Goat versus fish has never heard this word. Goat versus fish has heard the one saying him or her, yes, but goat versus fish has not heard him in this way. Goat versus fish only asks for celebrations of goat versus fish. If this goat, this Nick Blake goat, calls it a hymn, then that is what the ones call it. Goat versus fish simply calls it a celebration, yes? The one that is Nick Blake, that is a goat, does say that you can find it at Vishnu's Trumpet, and at www.vishnewstrumpet.com. And now let us hear the celebration of goat versus fish from the goat, Nick Blake.
Goat versus fish, goat versus fish. 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 Amen.
Whoa. What's happening?
What a celebration. What a celebration. But did you hear it? It said, Amen? It did say Amen. Goat versus fish does not know what is this Amen, yes? Goat versus fish simply says goat versus fish. It was saying goat versus fish, and then it said Amen. Why did it not just say goat versus fish? Goat versus fish does not know, but it was a very pleasant celebration. It was a very pleasant celebration of goat versus fish. Thank you for joining Goat versus Fish. You are one with Goat versus Fish. If you wish to follow Goat vs. Fish on the Instagram, on the Book of Faces, on the Twitterver, all at Goat vs. Fish, all at GoatVsFish. Subscribe, rate, and review the Goat vs. Fish podcast on the iTunes, on the YouTube, on the Libsyn, and even on the Twitch. Join the Goat vs. Fish discussion group on the Book of Faces to discuss Goat vs. Fish with other goat and fish. And when you are out in the land and the sea, find one who is lost. Find one who does not know the way. Find one who wanders about the Comic Con, if that is the place where you are, who does seem to not know, should I go here, should I speak to this one or to that one? And ask, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? Thank you for being a part of Goat vs. Fish. I am Goat vs. Fish, the goat fish. And it was written, and it was written.